Hello again. So today we're doing the second part of Joyous Perseverance from the second volume. Um, and but before we start, let's set our motivation. So considering our sense of or working towards developing our sense of responsibility for all beings, recognizing that we ourselves are far from being able to deliver much to all beings. We dedicate ourselves to the path of enlightenment, achieving awareness, self-awareness, but the enlightenment which enables us to spontaneously and effortlessly benefit all beings. And it's with this motivation that we're doing our best to consider and learn from, and to reinforce our practice in this endeavor. Okay, so again, just to recap very briefly on last week, in terms of joyous effort, what we're really looking at here is to find pleasure in engaging in the bodhisattva path. The bodhisattva, remember, is the mind. This mind or being is sattva. Body is a Buddhahood, so in Sanskrit. So a being who is dedicated to enlightenment, and the enlightenment in this case means the full enlightenment of a Buddha who is able to spontaneously benefit all beings and teach where there is no existing teaching. So there are a whole lot of qualities of Buddha which are talked about elsewhere, and one of the aspects of this is that a being who has this, who is set on enlightenment, is known as a bodhisattva, and the mind that is the sign of a bodhisattva is a mental aspect. Is this twofold bodhicitta, mind of Buddhahood, one which is this altruistic responsibility for all beings, completely impartial. There's very, very deep compassion, loving kindness for all beings, without any exceptions at all, and in both in the past, the present, and the future. So no enemies. Cherishing each individual as if they are the sort of a newborn child of a young mother, and then again with that an insight into the nature of reality so clear, or the Four Noble Truths, but specifically, generally, we talk about reality that is completely clear. So this is the first is the relative or the conditional bodhicitta, and the second one is the unconditional or the absolute bodhicitta. Together, these two minds provide us with the insight and the strength and the resilience for us to become Buddha. So within the practices of the bodhisattva, the six primary practices of the bodhisattva, we've covered the first three, and now we're moving on to the second three, and the first of those is the joyous effort. So the joy is in being able to and wishing to be on the path, practicing the path. So part of this is from last week is we're removing those which are incompatible with joyous effort. So, for instance, one of these is, there are three of them. One of them is a sense of lethargy or laziness, or an unwillingness to engage in the path. Often this is sort of a very passive sense. And then secondly is this finding pleasure in or comfort in those things which are of no value to the path, no value to all beings. And it's a bit like saying, if we know that our child is crying, our baby is crying, then for us just to say, I'm not interested, right? Or I much prefer to watch the football, whatever it is. Yeah. So this sort of thing is like, yeah, okay, we need to be able to, we've taken on this responsibility, so we must meet that determination to be responsible. And lastly is this this self-contempt, this idea that I'm no good or I'm not able to do this. So these three are the three incompatible states. So the next is Je Rinpoche is going to talk about the gathering the forces of the favorable conditions, rather than just eliminating those which are unfavorable. We're going to work on, that's better, the favorable conditions. So there are four parts to this. There's the power of aspiration, the power of steadfastness, the power of joy, and the power of relinquishment. So Je Rinpoche says, and we'll look into how these all work together as we follow this through. So all of these are going to help us develop this, or help us work on developing this sense of joy in being able to continue the path and continue to develop ourselves on the path to Buddhahood. So the power of aspiration primarily is based on this idea of yearning, and Je Rinpoche specifies, saying that aspiration can mean different things, like aspiring bodhicitta and so on, as used elsewhere. But here it's this yearning, this yearning is based on the idea of not a yearning to be able to meet the needs of all beings, right? So this is our sort of strong yearning, but the way in which we actually do this primarily is based on Shantideva's text, is to identify the root of that yearning, and that root is a continually meditation on karma, so cause and consequence. So the fact that every single action we have has a consequence, right? Mental action, speech action, or communication action, and physical action. All of these have consequences, and these consequences aren't just on our own mind, they're within the world, they're within the culture, they affect and they continue to affect once they've been done, and they can't be undone. Essentially, we can mitigate some of the effects, but we can. But once an action is done, it's in the past and it's historic, right? So, in this sense, we're living in a moving forwards in time. There's nothing that we can do about changing the past, except we can help to mitigate it through remediation and through our own sense of remorse and so on, which we've talked about many times. So remorse, working to repair, a commitment not to do it, this sense of confession, of owning up to it. These are how to deal with negative things, and likewise to deal with positive things is to take pleasure in what it is that we've done, rejoice in what we've done. Commitment to do it again, and so on. So these things work both ways. So karma here is very, very important, and primarily the two that when we begin to understand the power of karma and the sort of the irrefutability of karma, and karma here means that these actions will have effect, will have a consequence, then we will very quickly see how important it is for us to remove that karma, which is a cause of suffering, or is both a suffering and a cause of suffering. And karma just means action, right? So it just means action. So all we're saying is those actions that we make, regardless of whether or not they're what we say or what we write or what we think or what we do, or how we behave, all of these things is the engaging in the world. When we engage in the world, even our mental thoughts, our fantasies or whatever, these thoughts have our actions. And those actions themselves have these consequences. So those consequences can be neutral, they have no particular effect. They can be improving or causes of or creating happiness, or causes of and creating unhappiness. And they also create lots of other side effects. So we're looking for those which have a huge net benefit globally or universally, right? So those which bring joy, not just immediately, but in the long term. These actions are wonderful. So these things is like when we begin to think about karma, we begin to say, you know, I want to be able to generate joy and happiness in the world. This is the whole point. I'm generating joy and happiness for all beings. I'm removing and going to close down on anything which is going to cause suffering, both for myself and for others, always. So both happiness and suffering. This is about the long term, the long term, but also ideally the short term as well. However, if we have to choose, it's more important for us to consider the long term than the short term. So for instance, we may say, well, heroin gives me a huge amount of short-term happiness, but we can see very easily it gives me long-term misery. Same with sugar. If we have a lot of sugar, we end up with diabetes and all sorts of diseases. So we need to moderate our sugar. And likewise, so have a small amount is okay. But for us to become addicted to these substances is just going to be long-term trouble. So we have to think more about the larger consequences of these things. So then the other thing is to recognize that the journey of the Mahayana, of our dedication to become a Buddha, we sort of often imagine, oh, well, you know, maybe next year or something, but it's not like that. In fact, we can't rush it. We have to be aware of our own capabilities. And in general, the idea is that it's going to take us many, many, many countless lifetimes for us to become a Buddha. So we're on this path for a very, very, very long time. We might not believe in rebirth, but even still, what we can see is that the effects that we have will benefit the world if we're able to do that. So whether or not we live many, many lifetimes, or whether or not we only live one, in the end, the actions are going to be the same. We're going to say this life is going to have consequences which are universal, right? And my actions now will propagate like a wave across the whole universe. So even the smallest thing I do, this provides me with an opportunity to actually do something useful. Regardless, to become a Buddha or to help, to assist for a Buddha to arise, if we prefer to look at it that way, we can't imagine it's going to be very easy for this to do. So it's very, very rare, and in that sense, there's a huge amount of effort required for us to do this. So our current degree of energy levels towards Buddhism is generally considered to be quite weak and quite low. So we always have to think, okay, I actually need to work on developing a stronger sort of resolution. And this primarily is what's meant by this aspiration. This I think of saying, being determined to say, yeah, I've got to make this stronger. I really want to. This is really what I want to do. So there's mind primarily, which can be assisted with understanding precious human rebirth and impermanence, very, very strongly founded on karma and consequence. These are all things that we've talked about already. Insight into the Four Noble Truths, how the mechanisms of rebirth and 12 interdependent links work, can help us develop this strong sense of, yeah, I need to carry on this. I need to push on. So in the West, we have this Greek myth of Sisyphus, who was cursed by the gods to eternally push a great boulder up a hill, and this, in a sense, is the task of a bodhisattva, for us to continue to push this work. What we're working at is working against our afflictions. So we're trying to remove our afflictions by getting them, so if you like, getting our mind over the hill of being completely controlled by our afflictions. And it's an endless task. It feels like we're always working on it, and we don't even know what it is we're doing at first at all. We just have an idea. And so as we get more and more understanding in it, we become more aware of how heavy this rock is and how long the mountain is. And at that point, it was really important for us not to quail, not to give up, but instead find this vigor, find this enjoyment, recognizing that there's nothing else worth doing at all, and that even if I do not succeed, just being able to work at it is all I really need to do. So to continue to work at it, not worry too much about whether or not I get to the top of the mountain. What I must do is to find myself, find my identity, develop my identity as being somebody engaged in, for the rest of my life, as at least, if not future lives, engaged in this action of working to remove my afflictions and working to remove even the smallest amount of cause of suffering for all sentient beings, any sentient beings in this case. So this is the power of aspiration. And the second is the power of steadfastness. So this primarily is, Je Rinpoche says, this is really when we bring something to a conclusion without turning back, anything that we put our effort into. So the point about this is to say that once we've made a determination to do it, then we carry on and do it until we've finished. And this is really important. He says one of the aspects of this is we can't do everything. We've got to know our own limits, and knowing our own limits is absolutely relevant to our path. Right now, we might have some idea about our limits, but we're not very clear about them. And so we don't want to push too hard, because if we push too hard, as Je Rinpoche says this, then we can give up. We just become exhausted and feel unable, and we feel that we're limited by what it is we can do. So he says this is true with all our projects, anything that we're doing. So let's say we're doing a degree or whatever it is that we put our minds to, we should really work to succeed at it and finish it. In this way, we get a stronger, and we develop a stronger and stronger understanding of steadfastness, a courage, and the ability to know that we are able to conclude these things. And he says we need to be honest with ourselves. If we think that we're going to start something and then later on we're not going to do it, we shouldn't really even start in the first place. So he says, for instance, also it's like this is really something that happened in the West. Is like lots and lots of people at New Year's Day, they make a resolution, or we make a resolution to say, okay, I'm going to go to the gym every week, and every single gym in the West will tell you that there are a huge number of subscriptions for people who are going to join the gym, and they get this large amount of money coming in January, and maybe it's busy for the first few weeks, and then it just tails off to the regulars. All right, so here what we're looking at is exactly that, the idea of saying that once we've started doing it, then we continue to do it. Right, some things don't finish, so that's all right. We need to be able to build them into our life. And some things are temporary, and that's okay too. But the point about it, some of them don't have a strong conclusion, but what we're working on is being able to think, I'm going to do this, set up the boundaries, or to set up the constraints within which I'm doing this project before I start. And then it means I'm able to say, okay, I'm going to do this until until it's over, until it's done, until I've concluded this. And this way, we develop a sense of confidence in ourselves and the ability to actually put our minds, assess our ability to do things, and then work within that assessment. Then we don't have this sense of failure. And he says, Je Rinpoche says here, that if we even begin to start having this habitual thing of giving up halfway through, or those projects that we start, then because of this, then again and again we'll find ourselves not being able to retain a commitment. We get too used to the idea of trying and giving up. So this works against us. And in that sense, we also then lose a sense of empowerment. We become disempowered because we become used to the idea of being a failure, of not being able to complete things. And so in this sense, what we need to do is especially when it comes to our practice, in terms of our commitment to our practice, or whatever commitment we have, far better to go small to do what we can do, what we are able to do, rather than just to do something that we will never be able to continue. Now, again, obviously, if we are able to, some of us might be listening to this and thinking, okay, well, I'm not doing very well with my practice right now, but maybe I should and I could. And it's like saying, okay, well, let's try and bring it back. There's no harm bringing it back and starting again. But trying to do it in a way which actually it is achievable for me to do, to continue with, rather than something that I'm not able to continue to do with. So even if it's very, very small, very, very light, being able to put in something a little bit that helps me to say, yes, I did do that today. So one of the other aspects of this, which we need to think about, especially for these lifelong practices, like daily practice, whatever, is that if we are able to keep it, sustain it day after day, year after year, then we can get a little bit confident. And if we get too confident, we can take on more and more and more until we have 4, 5, 6 hours of commitments to do every day. And then something happens, a death or a change or an illness, and then this can all collapse. So it's far, far better for us to not commit ourselves too much, but to commit ourselves enough so that we may maintain it. Anyway, I think I've gone off too much on this one. So then on this, Je Rinpoche cites Shantideva. First I examine the endeavour, and then I undertake it, or I do not. If I'm unable, it is best not to undertake it. But once begun, I shall take it I shall complete it. I'll not turn back. So on this, Je Rinpoche talks about the 3 types of pride. So this is something that is easily confused, because pride is an affliction. So the idea of actually developing pride, I'm better than, I'm superior, is a mistake. So what this word is being used allegorically, or in analogy, rather than actually meaning being proud. And so Je Rinpoche again and again says, we're not talking about pride here. We're talking about a sort of something that's similar to pride. The pride in the 3 areas are known as the pride in action, pride in ability, and the pride over the afflictions. So one of the aspects about pride in action is to say that I'm going to find myself in situations where I have no support in my practice of the path, where those around me criticize me or punish me or disregard me or show no interest in what it is I'm doing, or completely don't understand the Dharma or any interest in the Dharma. And in that mind, I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to stand up and say, without to myself, within myself, I'm going to say, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. This practice or does, or the quality of the practice that they do. So if we're living in a monastery or a Buddhist center, sometimes it's very easy to pick up the culture of the center, where everybody is sort of saying, oh yeah, it's aspirational. Buddhahood's really impossible. And so we can end up with a very, very small practice, because we're seeing everybody saying, it's not really possible. We'd like to practice doing our pujas and stuff. So in this mind, we've got to be very, very careful to say, no, for me personally, I'm not going to have to judge others or to consider others' ideas or to try and change their minds. But on my side, I'm going to work and dedicate my life according to the bodhisattva vow that I've taken, or according to my wish to be able to take the bodhisattva vow and dedicate myself to practice in this way, quite seriously, right? And in this sense, we become sincere in our practice. And others might say, oh, he's taking it so serious or whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is for us to say, this is what Shantideva and Lama Tsong-kha-pa have had to do themselves, right? So the great practitioners, Milarepa, also, or many practitioners in the end, have to do it on their own. So this is this pride of action, which is to say, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing or whatever anybody else is involved in, or the expectations that others have of me. And my life is going to be working on the cutting edge of benefiting all beings. So this is called the pride about action, because it's saying, I will do this. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to I'm not going to be persuaded by others, and I'm not going to depend upon my practice, depend upon others for my practice. I'm not expecting to be lifted up through those people. Now, actually, in truth, of course, most of us, especially when we're starting, having a community is extremely useful for helping us with our self-discipline and understanding what it is we're doing. So as learners, we often are quite dependent upon the community, the broader community, to help us. But once we've got an idea about the Dharma, the practice itself, then we become more able to do this. And instead, we begin to provide an example of how to behave. So by being resilient, being able to keep on with our practice and being sincere in our practice from moment to moment, then this has a very strong influence upon others. Some feel antagonized by it, right? Because it's like, oh, well, you know, they get jealous because somebody else is getting all the attention, or because they feel they're unable to do it, or because they see that as being a judgment that what they've been doing has been wasteful or waste of time. So you get this, you know, all sorts of issues, and the main thing is just to stay. Doesn't matter. You know, in a sense, it's noise. What matters is I'm going to do my best to be quiet, to be humble, to carry on the practice, use what opportunities I can in that way. Not to be, look at me, how good my practice is. I've been doing 6 hours a day. You do this and everything will fail very quickly. Far better to be very humble, or even better, for nobody to notice, right? Really, especially in a community, we're best to be like a wallflower, quiet, just do the practice, not say too much, not bring too much attention to yourself. Much better. So then, in this sense, this is resilient. This is the pride of action. So then again, the pride of ability. So it's not real pride, right? Because it's like it's not as if I'm expecting others to be this way or that way. It's just I've got to concentrate on my practice. My responsibility in terms of my bodhisattva vow is to me. Yeah, not I'm doing it for all other beings, everybody, but I'm not able to take a vow on behalf of somebody else. Right? I'm restraining. It's my actions that are being restrained. This is my mind, my body that I'm in control of, or I'm working to control. So in this sense, it's like not mine in a grasping sense, but responsibility in terms of training. This mind is going to become a Buddha, right? This mind is going to become a Buddha. This is what this mind has chosen, right? So this is what we're working on. It doesn't matter about anything else. Ability, right? So the pride about ability is then also to do with recognizing that most sentient beings do not have clear minds about what's going on. If they did, they would not cause suffering. Yeah, they wouldn't cause suffering for themselves or for others. Clarity, understanding how things are, in terms of it is a sense being free of our afflictions, being free of those things that keep us bound into samsara. So with wrong views, or with mistaken attitudes, or a lack of training, mental training, all of us are really in this great big swimming mess. Yeah. So it's like recognizing that most beings are unable to even to look after their happy rebirth or happy futures. They're caught in these incredibly destructive cycles of behavior. Then it's like saying, okay, I'm going to work on the welfare of myself and others and all beings, right? So all others. So this is like saying, I'm not going to let go of the idea that having set my mind to the path to Buddhahood, I will again quail or feel unable to do this. This is something I've decided to do. So His Holiness Dalai Lama has said in interfaith groups, or often in Western groups, he says, Buddhists tend to be quite arrogant because we say we can become Buddha. We can become the same as the founder of our religion. Whereas most other faiths say, the highest state of reality is beyond us. We will never achieve it. So Buddhism has this idea of saying we can achieve it. We can achieve the same level of achievement as the founder of Buddhism itself. So in this sense, this sort of arrogance is exactly what His Holiness is talking about in terms of this pride of action. The fact that we have the ability to become Buddha is this sort of pride. So I think His Holiness prefers the word arrogance, but it's the same meaning here. So, and again, as I said, Jeremy Shea says, look, there should be no self-conceit saying, oh, I'm better than the others. It's not about whether or not we're better than or more able than others. The point is to say is that we've chosen to take this responsibility on behalf of all of others. So they might become Buddhas before us. Some of them might become Buddhas way before us. It's very likely to be the case, right? Our practices are quite weak. So in that sense, it's not as if we're competing or that we feel jealous if they're not doing as well, or we have to be doing the best. But the point about it is to say is that even if everybody else becomes a Buddha before myself, I still need to develop this sense of responsibility for all beings in that way. So it makes no difference in terms of whether or not I'm doing better than somebody else, or I'm superior than somebody else or not. It's a silly thing to try to work out. Far better just to say, to recognize, saying, I've got the ability to do this. I've taken on I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to depend upon others to do it. I'm just going to do it regardless of whatever else is going on. So the point about it in terms of, he says, why is it used pride or so on, is because others, in this case, like non-Buddhists or most non-Buddhists, and also normal sentient beings, believe that it's not possible to achieve the final state of reality, the most supreme state of reality. Yeah, Buddhists say it is possible. So it's this sort of idea of saying it's sort of like pride, but it's not pride. It's just a recognition of our ability, of the ability for our mind. So pride over the afflictions is slightly different. This is the last of the three prides. Pride of the afflictions is to feel able to, or sort of slightly to be a bit contemptuous. So, right, contempt, having contempt, this is the object of contempt. The legal objective, or the appropriate object of contempt, and the only appropriate object of contempt is the afflictions. So again, the idea of saying that I'm not going to allow these afflictions, my ignorance, my malice, my coarse attachment, my pride, my doubt, all of these things, I'm not going to allow them to control me, to push my buttons, to sway me, right? Instead, I'm going to take them over. I'm going to disempower them, and I will never let them defeat me. So this is sustaining this steadfastness, this ability of saying, it doesn't matter. I've put my armor of resilience on. I'm going to eliminate free myself from this lethargy. I'm going to enjoy working on the path. I'm going to recognize I have the ability to do it. I can do it. I will do it. Right. So this sort of thing is like, I can do it, I will do it, and I'll enjoy doing it. I'm going to love doing it. This sort of mindset there. So in this sense, it's like saying then it prevents us from, it helps us develop our courage, our ability, our strength. Like this. He says, Shantideva again says, if we look at this in terms of saying, he says, I shall conquer all. And he's talking about afflictions, nothing else. He's not talking about countries or peoples. Yeah, I shall conquer all my afflictions. None shall defeat me. I, a child of the victorious lion, Buddha. So a child of the Buddha means I'm on a bodhisattva, somebody who's working towards the bodhisattva, known as the children of Buddha. Is the meaning given to those who are walking this path, the Mahayana path. I, a child of the victorious lion, shall continue to have this pride that I shall be able to conquer all afflictions to come, right? So this is important. So really, in the sense, is courage, right? So developing this courage is important. So if we lose our courage, then we begin to feel fearful or less able. We feel disempowered by our afflictions. So Shantideva uses the idea of even a crow acts like a Garuda. So a Garuda is this sort of possibly mythological huge bird that is incredibly powerful over snakes. So and even Nagas, the spiritual snake. So a Garuda is a very, very powerful force on snakes. But a crow is not so powerful. This crow is just a normal crow. And so you have this great mythological sort of super crow or Superman, right? So the super bird that can easily outdeal anything. And then you have a crow, and this talks about that. So like even a crow acts like a Garuda when it finds a dying snake. Yeah, so it's like, oh yeah, I can be on easy trouble, easy, no problem, because the snake's dying already. And it says, if I'm feeble, then even a slight shortcoming will harm me. So this is the idea of saying, if I'm feeble, I'm like the dying snake. Yeah, I'm like allowing myself to be pushed around by my afflictions, by my mind, by my uncontrolled mind. So if I'm like that, then I'm just like a dying snake, and the smallest sort of affliction can overcome me and sort of like be like a superhero. So it's like fear, this thing about fear. If we have a fear, I think there's a Sufi story about this. It's like if we have this fear of something, then this thing grows. It becomes larger and larger. It becomes more and more able to destroy us because we fear it. We empower it. We disempower ourselves. So one of the issues about fear is while we allow ourselves to be controlled by fear, we imagine that our enemies, or in this case our afflictions, but whatever it is, the object of our fear becomes larger and larger and larger, and more and more imposing, and we feel less and less able to deal with it. So in that sense, it's like when we're able to recognize that the true strength of this, or the actual strength of this apparent problem, is being fed by fear rather than anything else, then our fear diminishes very, very rapidly, and what we see as something that's actually very easy for us to deal with. Yeah. So we have to be wary of not just these like pride but also fear and other things which can lead us into a lack of clarity about what's happening. And Sharawa is one of the students of John Tompa from the Kadam, says also, look, if you let go of this, if you let go of your resilience in terms of your practice, then giving up practice just consigns you to continue to suffer in samsara. So we don't see this very easily, right? Because we don't really see samsara very easily. When we see samsara very easily, when we recognize, actually see clearly the types of suffering, the core suffering is easy to see. Suffering of change is much harder for us to see. All pervasive suffering is very, very hard for us to see unless we've studied carefully. When we recognize all pervasive suffering, then the idea of giving up dhamma just becomes not available to us anymore. So on this, I think, personally, I think that there's something to be said for understanding some of the stories from other traditions, but also from the early tradition, where you have, let's say in the early sutras, where Lord Buddha gives a talk, and it says in the talk, when people listen to it, they became arhats, right? And it sounds as if it happens immediately. In fact, they say they immediately became arhats, or they immediately became enlightened. And yet Buddha says many other places, nothing is so sudden like that. So it's not as if there's a sudden jump. It's much more like a wave. There's a change that happens like this. So what does it mean to say something immediately happens like this? It means that there's an insight that arises from which there is no turning back. And it's not like a great big shock. It's much more like an understanding that provides us with something that says, okay, no, I can't do that anymore. Just like if somebody says to us, if somebody shows us, not says to us, but shows us that this is poison, deadly poison, will give us cancer, straight away, then we don't want it anymore. We recognize it's poison, and until then, it might look rather alluring or might taste delicious, but then it's like, okay, no, this doesn't work. It's horrific. It causes all sorts of problems. Then it's like, oh, when we see that, until we see it, it's like, well, such and such says this. Yeah, well, maybe, but it tastes great. But then when we actually recognize it, so like smoking, some of us have been smokers, and there comes a point in our life when we know we're being told, oh, it gives you lung cancer, and we see pictures of rotting lungs, and we're like, oh, well, well, yeah, but I've got plenty of time, or yeah, but not to me. And then there comes a moment in our journey, in our life, where we actually see the truth of it. And that moment, you could say, we're free from cigarettes, right? We're completely free from the burden of cigarettes. So even if we haven't stopped smoking, smoking won't last very much longer. Yeah, it won't, even because there comes a point where our recognition, our insight into smoking becomes so strong that we're no longer, that even the talons of addiction no longer have any hold on us. So at that moment, what we're able to say is that our future is now being determined by that insight. And likewise, I think that this is one of the aspects of, for instance, possibly Satori in Zen, and similarly, where it says, okay, I have this moment of insight and of enlightenment. And what it means is that now the path to enlightenment is guaranteed. Now it's understood so clearly that I will never veer from, or I'll never stop practicing. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm a Buddha automatically, right? But my path is no longer changeable while I have this insight. So likewise, this sort of thing, this insight is primarily, even though it's very, very gentle, very, very small, often very subtle, and almost hard to notice when it happens, the fact that it changes our entire future, our entire life is changed by that insight. I think this is really what's meant by these. So it says again, if we, Je Rinpoche is saying, if we have this lack of steadfastness, there's a lack of strength through these three types of pride, then he says, in the end, I'll be easily defeated by my shortcomings, by my own problems. And then my desire, or the vow, for me to conquer the three realms, in other words, to achieve Buddhahood, is really just a joke. So he says, Je Rinpoche says in conclusion to this section, he says, therefore we should stop expecting something from others So again, this is like the same. If we're having an argument, we have an argument and we've ended up in this long-term fight again and again, it's like they push my buttons, I push them back. And there's a point of saying, well, it's up to them. Is it often with parents, right? So we have our parents, we're having a difficult relationship with our parents, and it's like, well, they're not doing anything, I'm the child. And so it's like, well, and it's like, this is the expectation on others. It's up to us to sort this out, not up to the other side, right? It can happen with children too. People say, oh, I brought them up. They need to stay. They're the ones that need to change. So this sort of, it doesn't have to be family. It can be anyone. It's like, oh, they're the ones who are causing the trouble. At this point, it's like, then we do not have the armor of doing it alone. It's not saying, it's actually up to us to sort this out, not up to the other side. It doesn't matter if they look down on me or whatever. What matters is that change happens, and change for the benefit of everybody involved happens. That's what matters. That's where we can see, actually, in a sense, the pride of saying I can do it alone is completely different from pride, because pride is the opposite of humility, and often what we need is to take the humble step. So we have to be confident and say, unlike me, others might not be able to do it, but I'm going to do it, right? So he says this really, really powerful way of us being able to actually work on our practice. And also, he said we should remember and consider and continue to consider that it's a mistake to abandon our commitments after a point. So again, one of the aspects of this very much is to say, when we set off on a project, to give ourselves a limit, to give ourselves a boundary, to say, okay, well, like with the gym, okay, if I sort of say, oh, I'm going to do the gym every week for the next year or whatever, and it's just too vague, too far away, then it's very, very hard for us to do. But if we say, okay, I'm going to go to the gym for 4 times this month, then I can do another commitment after that. And that means I've actually managed to do something that's completely achievable. So it's much, much easier for us to develop ourselves in small, safe steps, something that I completely am confident in my ability to do. Small, not too far away, something I can see, something I feel completely able to do, and know that I can finish it. Then at the end of that, I can review it. I can then work on saying, okay, well, do I want to do another 4 this month or not? So that's absolutely fine. It's like saying, okay, I've done that. Now what do I want to do? So these small, safe steps means I'm able to make sure that I can tick off the box. Yes, I did that. Much, much safer, much better. So then after this, talking about the powers of aspiration and selflessness, is the power of joy. So the power of joy is developed in relation to our aspiration, is this yearning, right? So this yearning to do something, we talked about that earlier on, there's a yearning in order to do that, and this joy arises when we engage in it, right? We want to keep our practice, we want to work on the practice, and when we're able to do that, when we're able to take part in the practice from moment to moment or from day to day, then this joy arises, because we have this steadfastness, right? From the previous one, we've got the ability to say, yes, I can do it. Yes, I need to do it, which is the aspiration. This is what I want to do. And I'm going to do it. And then this joy arises because I'm doing it. And I'm able to do it. And this joy arises because we've already covered off the fact of eliminating any fear of not being able to do it. We've chosen steps that are achievable to us. We've determined that we need to do these steps. So these two have act as the foundation of a power of joy. And then as we develop this joy, this sense of fulfillment, then this fulfillment arises in us, and it helps to reinforce. So we work in a positive, a positive reinforcement, where these 3 work together to help us develop a stronger ability and a sense of fulfillment from being able to have concluded each step of this. So then he says there's this thing about it, which is also he introduced the word it as a sense of insatiability. We feel unsated by doing it. What we feel is that this is right, this is working well, and I can do more, and I don't feel like, oh, I've had enough, I've done enough. Yeah. So when we're working with the bodhisattva activities, enough is when we're Buddha, right? So in the end, is we begin to if we feel we're having enough, then we need to go back to our aspiration. We need to recognize just the context of our bodhicitta in this sense. So, for instance, we take pleasure of food, we have a wonderful meal. There's only so much pleasure we can take before we've had enough. Otherwise, we're going to be sick, right? We've eaten as much as we can. So there's a point of saying, now I'm satiated. I've satiated from food. I don't want any more food. And the point here is saying with bodhisattva activity is that I've never had too much. Yeah, but what I need to do is to keep that and the strength, the resilience, the strength of saying, I don't mind being on this path. This is what I want to do. This is what I've chosen to do. So then Je Rinpoche talks a little bit about citing Shantideva about this very strong allegory of honey on a razor's edge. So specifically with some sorts of activity, like saying, like for instance, unprotected sex with a stranger, there's a little bit of pleasure, but but you slice your tongue. Okay, so the idea is you're not just like being clever about licking the honey off the razor by dragging it off. The idea is you'll be slicing yourself in order to get that sweetness. So when you lick the honey off the razor blade like this, you're going to be cutting your tongue. And so for a little bit of sweetness, you've got all the problems of a cut tongue. And this is like sort of saying, for instance, we're talking about addictive drugs or unprotected sex with a stranger. You could end up with illness, or you could end up with a family with no support for that family at all, and no sort of necessary sense of commitment in that family, or commitment from the partner involved. So this can become really very difficult. And yet we did it just for that little bit of pleasure, right? So in this way, it's sort of saying that primarily we need to be for a little bit of pleasure, essential pleasure, we will do these things, even though it'll just cause suffering. So what he's saying is we don't want to have that sense of insatiability. The insatiability we have is because it is a cause of joy, and it remains a cause of joy. So this is the distinction between normal worldly insatiability and this bodhisattva insatiability. So then he says this mind. There's a very nice verse from Shantideva, again, Bodhisattva Charitatara, of this sun-scorched elephant diving into seeing a pond, a cool pond, and diving into it with huge amounts of joy. So it's this mind is when we understand the sun, the burning sun of suffering, the causes of suffering, and we see Dharma as the opportunity of Dharma practice, the opportunity to be able to remove our affliction of this sunburnt, afflictive nature in this sense, then we will dive in and take huge amounts of pleasure in being able to relieve ourselves from the afflictions and all other beings from our afflictions. So this is a very strong image. Oh, now, needless to say, this is just a metaphor. The sun is sometimes a wonderful thing, the sun of the Dharma, and here it's using it as some the pain caused by the scorching of our afflictions. So let's not get too hung up on the various symbols. The idea is to say that we can imagine and visualize very easily an elephant who's felt the heat of the day, having been worked all day for lugging wood around or from whatever, and then sees this end of the day, sees this lovely pond, and dives in, takes pleasure. I think some people have this with a bath at the end of the day, actually, so it's not too hard for us to see. So then there's the power of relinquishment. This is the fourth power that helps to bring joy in our lives, joy in our practice, right? And this really is, again, underlying the non-ardent nature of Buddhism and of Buddhist recognition of recognizing our abilities and only working to our abilities. So when we're working, if we become fatigued mentally or physically or emotionally fatigued from our joyous effort, from our working on practice, then it's important to rest. Yeah, so give ourselves a break. Otherwise, we become exhausted and we can become very disheartened. So Je Rinpoche says this is really important that when we do that, then we can, then it allows for us to actually meet our abilities rather than push ourselves too far. And he says, then once we have rested, to get back into the harness, to carry on doing what we can. And then once we've finished our activity, whatever it is that we're doing, not to feel that we've finished, that we're satisfied, that we then need to work on something next and carry on with the same sort of perseverance. So it's not as if it's saying, oh, well, I've done my 15-year retreat or whatever it happens to be, or my millions of prostrations, so I'm done now. It's like saying, okay, well, now what can I do? What can I do next? Like this. And he cites Shantideva, when my strength declines, I shall leave the task so I can do it later. When it's done and it's over, I shall set it aside and I'll move on to the next task and then the next. So Je Rinpoche says it's very important for us to as soon as we finish one task, to move on to another, because if we consider an earlier task enough or sufficient for this life or for our practice, then it will be a real obstacle for us in terms of developing higher attainments, higher abilities, and so on. And he says it's really important not to overexert ourselves. We've got to be overly intense, and we've got to avoid being overly intense. And we've also got to avoid being overly relaxed. And he says it's better for us to work on making our practice like a river, right? So, so he then cites Matritta, we had before, in terms of, in order to make ourselves more exalted, we never overexert or relax too much. And this way, then our good qualities become indistinguishable through the former and later phases. So again, this is like what I said earlier, it's a general, a very, very gentle change from who we are right now to becoming Buddhas. And this change happens because we keep at it. We set the pace. We can sometimes speed up, sometimes slow down. Try not to stop. Definitely try not to go to get distracted or to give up, and just keep on a little bit, right? Sometimes we can go a little bit faster. Sometimes we need to go a bit slower. It's like on a path. Sometimes a bit muddy, or there are rocks. We need to be a bit more careful. Sometimes there's a sharp corner. We need to be aware. We need to be vigilant that we're moving the right way and doing the right sort of thing, right? So like this, absolutely right. This is not like anything we should expect other than that. So the path primarily is to keep this, keep moving, But I guess, and rest when we need to. But then the point about it is to say we have to also be aware of how easy it is for us to say, oh, I'm too tired now, I can't do anything. And for that to go on for a year or 5 years, right? And then that doesn't work for us at all. So the point is even a month, right? So the point is to say that a rest is like a rest to be able to regain our strength, not to give up, and to know that whatever I've committed to, I will continue to finish. Yeah, like that. So then when it comes down to it, saying sometimes I might need to rest it a little bit, but I can do this, which is a supporting activity. So it might be I'm meditating on one thing and I just need to put it to one side to accommodate it, to understand it, to process it. Meanwhile, I can carry on loving kindness or compassion and so on. And then I can, so that helps me. It helps me to revitalize my energy, or I can meditate on loving kindness, on bodhicitta, and then on joyous effort. And that gives me the energy I can to then get back to the task. So like that instead. And Je Rinpoche cites Geshe Podawa, who was again a student of Lama Dontonpa, I think, in the Kadam. And he sort of says there's these two scouts. So basically there are these areas in Tibet, and you have this sort of police forces. They're not called police forces because it was a sort of militia, really. And different areas had different reputations for their militia. It's in the 12th century, so and the idea was that there's a place called Samadrupa where the scouts sort of the militia starts off to find the robbers, and yet they give up very quickly, whereas the Tsong-kha-pa, who are well known for carrying on, maybe they take a bit of time to start off, but once they go, they get there. So this is a bit like the rabbit and the tortoise. You know, there's a famous Western story, which maybe originally was Buddhist, of the rabbit racing the tortoise, and the rabbit's like, oh, I can, you know, I'll win this, and sort of in the end, the tortoise just carries on doing it. Yeah. So the other example that Je Rinpoche gives, Bodawar gives here is a louse. And says a louse moves very slowly, right? The parasite. A louse moves very slowly, but it's continuous. It'll get to where it gets, and then it can feed easily. But a flea, it takes huge jumps, goes all over the place. But it often, after it's done a jump, it just sits where it's landed and sort of waits around, and often doesn't get what it wants because it's done this huge bound, but it missed the target in this sort of sense. So it says it's like, in terms of our practice, it's better to be a louse than a flea. So yeah, so a louse is gradually working on it. A flea is like woo woo, and then gives up, right? So it's like that. We don't want to be the woo. We want to be the slow and steady wins the race. So then he says, once we understand so again, in further conclusion here, he says, we've got the elimination of the unfavorable conditions, which is the three types of laziness. And then we need to, having identified them with our mind stream, not just understand them theoretically, understand how they arise within us. Then we can attend to their remedies, how to work on those. And then on the powers, the power of aspiration, which is we've talked about, the power of the power of steadfastness and the power of joy, and also as well through the power of relinquishment, we become able we become adept at being able to know how to move forwards, right? So we're working on keeping our joy and keeping able to do our joy. And my experience, most of my life has been really quite not able to do this practice. But when I was younger at Lam Rim with Geshe assisting in my training, there were some days where I was able to not waste more than a few moments of my day. Yeah. So the whole day from waking to sleep was filled in Dharma practice, Dharma activity, Dharma meditation. So not every day. Well, it's quite rare. But at the end of the day, being able to do that, there's a huge sense of joy, of ability, of confidence. And this was really, really important, really uplifting. So I can see very clearly, even though it was a while ago, how when we're able to see ourselves progressing because we've got this strong conviction and ability to work on every single moment, that we have this incredible sense of fulfillment. But this fulfillment, as Je Rinpoche says, doesn't mean that we can rest. It means we can now move on to the next day. So it says that once we've developed that, then we have to understand remaining being intent on our joyous effort, or our joyous perseverance. So what we're working on is to eliminate what is to remove what is to be eliminated, and to develop what needs to be developed. And so it's the idea of talking about fighting off and destroying our afflictions, these problems, our mental problems, our delusions, mistaking impermanent things for being permanent, for mistaking suffering things for being non-suffering, mistaking empty things for being non-empty, right? That this is a problem for us. Selfless things as having self, or ourselves included. So Jeremy goes into some detail about the analogy of a fight, right? And he says, when we're battling our afflictions, we have to persevere and become proficient in two aspects. One is taking defensive precautions, putting up the shield and so on, to avoid wounds to our minds. So allowing ourselves to be defensive in terms of against our afflictions, and preventing our afflictions from attacking us, being able to spoil our mind. So we might feel this malice arising. It's like, no, I'm defending myself against the malice like this. And then once my mind while the mind is being sort of keeping it in defense, then we can get the dagger of loving kindness in to slice it, cut off its head. So not just malice, but that was just one example. So it's the remedy to stop the action. So this idea, remember, is to say when we have this malice, when the malice arises, we've talked about this before again and again, and malice arises, is to recognize that it's directly incompatible with loving kindness. So the object of malice is what I need to develop the loving kindness of. So it might be if I have this strong malice towards Peter, I don't know who Peter is, but it's just an imaginary Peter, then the loving kindness needs to be for Peter in that moment. It's no good me having loving kindness for Paul. It's loving kindness for Peter I need. So in that sense, it's like saying, okay, so I've got I'm feeling like, I really want to hurt. I see this wishing to hurt cause trouble for Peter arising. So it's like saying, oh, no, right? I'm not going to let that. And I love Peter. I'm looking forward to helping Peter. I want to work with Peter. I want to help Peter. His mind's much better. So this way of being able to work is like a continual battle with our afflictions this way. It says the other thing is often we have multiple enemies in different places. So we might have Peter over here, and we've got Paul over here, or Sarah over there, or whatever it might be. So I'm feeling really strong need towards Sarah, which is completely inappropriate, and I've got to face off Peter here. So I have all of these things can happen all simultaneously, and I've got to be able to to do my true Dharma Kung Fu is like working with my afflictions. It's not working outside, right? It's working with my mind. So this aspect of saying, okay, working to oppose, to destroy my afflictions. This is what we're doing here. We're not doing Kung Fu stuff with the body, training ourselves like this. It's not so useful. Much better is to train our minds to do the heavy lifting. Some people might criticize me. I'm not saying there's no value to Kung Fu. I'm saying that in the end, the Kung Fu might help us with our minds, but it's the mind that does the work, right? It's the mind is where we're working on. It's not the body. The body can help us develop our mind sometimes, like in yoga, right? Hatha yoga. But at the same time, in the end, it's the mental flexibility that we're looking for, the mental strength that we're looking for, and it's that really is. And not doing it just to become better at yoga or better at Kung Fu in order to be able to overcome our afflictions. Otherwise, it's not path. So if we have the opportunity with these various different secondary practices to use them to assist us with our primary practice, which is the Bodhisattva path, bodhicitta, we can use many different methods. But in the end, the Bodhisattva walks the path of the 6 perfections, and that's what we're looking at here. So it's not saying, I'm not saying, don't do Kung Fu. I'm saying what we need to do is to say, use that Kung Fu to work on the 6 perfections. Recognize the enemy. The enemy is the mind, is the mental affliction. Mind itself is okay. It's the mental affliction that is preventing us from being able to meet our promise to all sentient beings, like that. And now here we also have Je says, look, let's be clear. I mean, this school, the Gelug school, is considered by many to be academic. But what do we find here is Je says, some people consider that knowledge is the most important aspect of practicing and teaching, and they make knowledge alone crucial. And when they then inquire into the teachings, they use they dispel by means of study the confusion of ignorance. But meanwhile, because we're not cautious about the other afflictions, such as a pride or a sense of arrogance or a sense of understanding the nature of impermanence or being kind or loving kindness or these actual practical realities, then the mind becomes utterly ruined by wrong behavior. So this way, we can't work this way. We can't just say, oh, I'm just going to be a specialist in this one aspect. I've got to be able to use, I need to learn. I need to work on understanding things very clearly. I need to have a very precise understanding. But that's not enough. That's just one of the aspects of my practice. I need to have a full-fledged, full armament of practice, right? This way, then it works. He says others think that disciplining the mind is much more important than knowledge and emphasize meditation. Then essentially they cast away caution about the enemy, confusion, and they don't study or learn, and then they become very confused about what it is they're meant to be doing and how to do it or what it means to do it. And so in the end, it's like, I don't know whether or not I'm meditating correctly or what my object of meditation is precisely, and therefore, but I'm just going to keep myself disciplined. And this way, it says, then basically become confused, or the practice becomes blurred and distorted by the infractions of missing the point. And he says, in our battle, if the sword would fall from our hand, we immediately will go down and we'll pick it up, right? And this is like so the battle. To lose the weapon like this is to let go of our mindfulness, and the first thing we need to do is to regain our mindfulness, right? And we have to reapply mindfulness, and it's like vigilance as well. So mindfulness is not about just merely being aware of the fact that I'm moving my body, or I'm breathing in and breathing out, or I'm stepping forward now, stepping left now. The mindfulness primarily is being aware of what it is I'm doing in relation to the path. Yeah. So am I on the path now? Is my body on the path? Is my speech on the path? Is my mind on the path? So being aware of that and saying, is this practice that I'm doing right now? Right? That's mindfulness. So is this bodhicitta, is this bodhisattva activity? Then there's like, maybe I could do better. That's mindfulness. That's mindfulness meaning there. Vigilance is holding on to, saying, okay, so vigilance is like saying, yeah. Mindfulness is saying it's not, and vigilance is saying, well, do something about it, right? You've got to do something about that. Stop it. Yeah. So you have this guard, this mindful vigilance, which helps us in terms of our practice. So then Je talks a little bit about wisdom and how this works in terms of what is meant by wisdom, discerning everything. And he says this is just very clearly what is to be adopted and what's to be rejected, how to behave, what to do, what not to do. We're not just talking about insight into emptiness. We're talking about knowing in the moment what the right thing is to do. Yeah. So the more we understand the nature of people around us, the more we understand it relate to and empathize with individuals, and we become more skilled at, more able to meet their needs in the particular moment. When we're on our own, then we also need to be working on thinking more clearly about how to improve our practice in the moment. And he says this vigilance, right? This is where we actually work in the moment rather than let it develop a bit. So vigilance is like saying, okay, I'm seeing things aren't quite going here. I can let it go for a bit. And it's, no, we need to stop it early. It's a bit like a poison arrow. As soon as it might be a small scratch, but we've got to work on it immediately, remove the issue. Because if we don't do that, it gets to spread. We're giving it life. We're breathing into it. So the idea is not to breathe into this. We don't want to give it life. We want to actually eliminate it. Otherwise, we have to fight it much harder. And then one of the aspects of this is the idea that Ken Pemigels Rinpoche mentioned, is saying if we get our malice when it's small, in the very, very early moments of malice, the intention to harm, the wish to cause harm or to punish, then at that moment when it arises, it's like a small tumble of snow. It's actually quite easy to stop. You can stop it with your foot. You know, this an analogy, right? And then later on, though, it's an avalanche, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So we've got to be aware of the fact of sustaining this mindfulness and vigilance to say, okay, there it is. Now I stop it like this. So in terms of our actions, in terms of our abilities, in terms of our concentration or awareness of ourselves, one of the stories given is of somebody who is carrying a pot of mustard oil, and they've been told that if they drop a single drop from this mustard oil, then a swordsman will kill them, right? So the idea is saying you need to take this mustard oil from one house to another house, and there's going to be a man behind you with a sword who's going to cut your head off if you drop a single drop. And then it's like you be very, very, very careful about how you work. This is like your karma. We want to be aware of the fact that we need to begin to control our mind. We'll be able to be empowered by our mind rather than disempowered it. So in this sense, we need to develop this sense, not the fear, but the concentration. We don't want to be terrified of everything, right? And it's mainly about sustaining that and the basis of that is this loving kindness, this mind, bodhicitta mind. And then he says also, this is nice again. So when we find ourselves resting too much, maybe, yeah, and taking it easy, this is sort of the snake of slothfulness, right? So the snake is like this poisonous snake. So the idea is saying you have this poisonous snake is coming onto our lap, and if we saw a poisonous snake coming onto our lap, in reality, we'd jump up, or we'd go, ah, and move it immediately, or even some of us, even a small spider, right? Ugh! So he was sort of seeing, imagine we have this thing, that we don't want, we sort of feel crawling on our arm or into our head or into our ears, like, ugh, get out quickly, right? Like once I had a beetle come in my ear, it's like, oh, come on, get out straight away. That's laziness, right? So our aspect to when we're seeing ourselves being very, very sleepy, then we see that as being the sort of, the earwig or of laziness, or whatever it is, or the snake of laziness. And it's like, okay, I'm being, if I'm just taking it too easy, I need to respond as strongly as if it were a beetle in my ear, or a snake on my lap. Yeah. So it's like, I'm not saying that this is that the beetle is laziness. I'm saying that the way we respond is how we should respond to laziness, like that. Okay, sorry, I need to be a bit more clear there. So then again, is this idea of saying that, if we've taken the Bodhisattva vow, or if we're aspiring to take the Bodhisattva vow, or even if we value the Bodhisattva vow, then for us to allow these things that are incompatible with the vows, incompatible with our aspiration to meet, to benefit all beings, is like, well, why would I allow for that? I should feel a sense of remorse as the same as if I'm doing wrongdoing. It's not wrongdoing. In many cases, it's neutral behavior, but not having given the vow, it's like, now it's not suitable for me to do this anymore. So this is where really, in a sense, why it's so important for us to understand what the practice of a bodhisattva is. Because this is understanding the practice of a bodhisattva is our practice. It's what we're going to be doing from moment to moment in our mind, right? In our body, speech, and mind is a bodhisattva activity. So these 6 perfections that we're talking about is based with joyous perseverance, provides us with the framework for us to know to sustain our practice. Je Rinpoche is saying this here. And he says we do this in association with all the others. We can't just do it on its own. So the joy of the joyous effort, joyous perseverance requires us to mix with all the others as well. Je Rinpoche, also Je Rinpoche is talking in terms about our practice and joyous effort practice from Shantideva. He says, for us to have a strength, to find the strength to be able to do something, before I engage in any activity, it's a good to consider a conscientiousness, right? Being aware of the sense of responsibility and being conscientious, being aware of what's expected, what I expect of myself in this, and then rise to the task. So like this. So not to allow ourselves to be inhibited, to recognize, in one sense, that battling our afflictions is a great deed. So is valid and valuable to us. So he says we should really. I'm sorry, I'm going to go backwards here. I slightly skipped. Yeah, so once we, he says it's really good for us to recognize our afflictions as the enemy. This is, in a sense, is the basis of my own path, is to recognize once we've accepted our mission, right, to become Buddha for all beings, then we recognize anything that is an obstacle to that is our enemy. But primarily, our primary enemy, almost entirely our only enemy, is not outside of us, right? It's inside of us. It's internal. It's these afflictions. When we've cured the afflictions, then we can be able to see much more clearly what's going on. And also we see that, in fact, what we thought of were enemies were not enemies at all. So it's really important for us not to make a mistake by externalizing our afflictions and dressing them up as people or corporations or societies or cultures or any of these things, right? The afflictions are on the inside. We dress up these external entities as having these bad qualities because of the afflictions that we have on our side. We need to remove the afflictions, not by changing what's happening around us, but by removing the afflictions on the inside. This is true regardless of the object. We might think, oh, that such and such keep on harming me. It's like, okay, that's my problem on my side. I need to remove that altogether. It doesn't mean to say that if I'm in a situation where I'm being continually bullied or harassed or disempowered by somebody, that I should think I'm blaming myself for it. I'm not talking about blame. Yeah. And it also, likewise, it's not as if I'm saying, therefore, I shouldn't do something to respond. And clearly, the aspect of saying, if I'm in a very toxic environment, the right thing to do is to work out whether or not I'm able to deal with this toxic environment. If I'm not able to deal with it, then I need to do something about that. Yeah. Je Rinpoche says, you do what you can, but if the situation you're in is beyond your control, you're not able to accept it from within your mind, you need to do something about that, but possibly not stab or kill. What we're talking about is find other ways to be able to meet to meet your needs, to develop yourself in terms of meet your own practice, but definitely be aware of those boundaries. So if you're going to find a way of being able to extricate yourself from a difficult or toxic situation without creating more harm, without creating trouble, then that's fine. But if somebody says to you, if you move, you'll be causing me a huge amount of harm, and they continue to bully you, they're slightly undermining their own words. So we don't want to find ourselves stuck in a situation where we are being threatened by, in terms of our practice, by somebody who continues to undermine our practice. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's not right. In fact, there's one of the aspects of our vows as bodhisattva is if anybody says to us, oh, you need to do this because you're a bodhisattva, we need to disregard that. So this is a part of the joyous effort, aspect of doing it on our own. We need to be able to say, actually, it doesn't matter. It's not up to them to determine how I do my practice. It's up to me to determine that. And if I'm in a seriously toxic situation, a toxic situation which is destroying me or destroying my ability to practice, then I need to do something about that. And that is external, because I'm not able to do it internally. If I'm able to take the situation on and work with it and turn it into practice, then there's no problem. Yeah, but it's extremely hard to do that in some situations, and especially where we are being abused, then we have to say, actually, from a position of compassion and loving kindness, I need to do something to stop that abuse or to take myself out of that abusive situation. Yeah, and this way, then that helps us a lot. So again, and in brief, the other aspect of this joyous effort is to recognize, saying, if I'm not finding it easy to do my practice, I'm not finding it joyful in my practice, I'm not finding it, I'm not inspired to practice from moment to moment, then these again are indicators. I've said this for each perfection. These are indicators about my understanding of bodhicitta, both the relative bodhicitta of loving kindness and compassion, and also the ultimate bodhicitta of insight into the nature of reality, wisdom. So together, these things here, if I have correct insight, correct nature of understanding, correct bodhicitta of understanding based on compassion for all beings, then I will naturally find joy in working on this. So again, we're seeing precisely the same as the others. These are checks and balances that demonstrate where the weakness in these two underlying features of my practice are. But we can train in joyous effort as well. We can develop joyous effort independently of just trying to work with the two bodhicittas. And when we do so, we are able to remove obstacles to those bodhicittas as well. So it's a strong internal cohesive group that help us develop our enlightenment and our enlightening activity. And that's all we're trying to do here, right? So yeah, it's not as if we go around going, hey, all the time, but it's essentially what we're talking about in terms of this joy is this sense of fulfillment, this sense of continuing to want to work at the path, and finding this continual joy in being able to work at the path and engage in the path gives us this amazing ability, amazing resilience and strength and courage that we would otherwise not believe we had. So it's really important for us to recognize that we can do these things and that we're able to do these things if we really want to do them. And then if we want to do it, there's no problem at all. So one of the aspects of this primarily is also to think about in terms of the pride aspect, is that when we're looking at in terms of taking on the responsibility for beings, there's sort of three different metaphors or analogies given to this sort of this sense of responsibility. And one of them is like as a prince, where I'm leading the army of all beings to enlightenment into battle again. So the battle against the affliction. So this way is the idea of saying I'm a prince. Another way is like a ferryman, where I'm facilitating and getting everybody across the river of samsara, or whatever it happens to be. And the other one is as a shepherd, where I'm working from behind, encouraging others to follow what they feel is their direction, but in fact leading them into the path of enlightenment. So these aspects are all, the shepherd, the ferryman, and the prince are all different ways of looking at leadership, in terms of leadership, either from the front, showing, sort of demonstrating the way forward, how we need to move, from the middle, as a team working within a group, how we are going to get there, or from behind saying, well, how do you think about going here, for instance? So each of these are facilitative, they're empowering, they're considering with care and attention how best to work with the others, and none of those three are the only one that we need to practice. We need to develop all three of these in our own approach to different situations. So that's something to add on in terms of this. I think it's good to think a little bit about how a prince meets another prince, right? So we talked earlier on saying, well, I might feel that, one of my sentient beings I sort of feel responsible for is going to become a Buddha before me. And it's like, okay, well, I shouldn't feel jealous. This is like great. We're brothers in this. We're all sisters in this. We're working together in this. And likewise, a prince, it's not like, these are my people, go and find your own. It's like, the more the merrier. Come and help. Let's work together on this. So this idea of there's no sense of possession or jealousy involved in this. The idea is we're all working towards the same goal, which is the elimination of this self-centeredness, this selfishness, jealousy mind, pride mind, afflictions of malice, of wrong view, and so on. So like this. So we need to be aware of saying that these analogies, they actually can lend themselves to a very strong idea about what it is we're doing. But we also need to know that in the end, they're merely analogies in this sense. Okay, so I think I've talked for quite some time. Let's dedicate any merits to benefiting all beings, for us to consider anything here that's useful, anything that's been useful, to feel how can I enrich my life by engaging in it. I want to use this to learn, to inform me in my actions, inform me in my practice, inform me in my mind, such that I can engage in aspiring to become a bodhisattva or treading the bodhisattva path, such that I can benefit all dear, wonderful, sentient beings who are currently suffering. So that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm dedicating this for. And then let's, again, as ever, let's sit. So just a couple of minutes on joyous effort